Richard Charkin has been working in the publishing industry since 1972. This is the second time that he's been on the Bibliophile, and we are at his offices in Bedford Square, London, England. Welcome to the Bibliophile.
Well, thank you. Very happy to be back.
It was a really enjoyable occasion the last time around, where I got to see your backyard and listen to all the airplanes. And
they're still there.
Yeah, today I want to talk about some of the challenges that are facing the publishing industry. You've identified a number of them, but I want to start off with one that has its, I think it may well have always been a concern of publishers. I know Geoffrey Faber was concerned about it, and Michael Joseph too. So the question is birth control for books required?
What a great question. The answer is no. There is little doubt that there are far more books being born than probably deserve to be born, and definitely more books are born than do good for the industry, in that they clog up, if I can continue the medical metaphor, they clog up the arteries of the industry. However, I would treat birth control for books in the same way as I would treat murdering babies. Every book is someone's baby, and the creativity, the diligence that goes into those books, even if we see them as meretricious, but for someone they are real. And I think stamping on creativity in any way is a mistake.
So you're pro-life?
I'm pro-life. Who'd have thought? But, I mean, the technology that allows, what is it now, 500, 600,000 new titles in English every year, adding to the tens of millions of available books, the technology which allows that to happen also allows us to navigate to where we want to be. In a way, it reinforces the role of the publisher, of the literary agent and the publisher and the retailer to act as gatekeepers, to help readers find the books they want and not the ones they do not want.
So we're being overwhelmed right now, and this is a role that...
It's always been a role. I think it's become more acute just because of the volume. Mm-hmm. And if you want to draw a parallel with another part of publishing, which is scientific publishing, the number of research papers being published in the world today, I think I'm not using this word incorrectly. I think it has grown exponentially over a period of probably 50 years to a number that I don't even have the number in my head, but it's hundreds of thousands of research papers every year. And what the scientific community has had to do is to develop a triage system. Mm-hmm. Now, we don't want to stamp on any of those research papers, but we need to help people navigate. And that's what publishers do, arguably.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you should mention science, because one of the things that you've been responsible for with Bloomsbury after the enormous success of Harry Potter.
And continuing success of Harry Potter. We're doing more now than we've ever done. It's extraordinary.
How so?
Illustrated editions, on the back of her fantastic activities with her play, a big show at the British Library, which is now in New York, the movies, everything which enhances Harry Potter and enhances our sales.
So mostly the backlist then?
Oh yeah, backlist.
Yeah.
Yeah, but what's wrong with backlist? I'm sure Geoffrey Faber and Michael Joseph would be as keen on backlist as I am.
Yeah, no, that's the backbone.
But sorry, we got post Harry Potter. Bloomsbury has built what you might describe as a safer, a more sustainable not so much bestseller driven, although we welcome bestsellers, but we have this balance between what we call the consumer and the non-consumer divisions.
Well, yes, and in fact, that the idea of a glut of books on the market, or the reason that publishers publish so much is, I suppose, that it's a numbers game, they feel, and that at some point they're going to hit it big with a bestseller, and they don't know exactly what that's going to be.
Well, yes, that's certainly true, but if I could revert to science again, in natural selection, in evolution, there are two principal strategies. One you might describe as the elephant strategy, where an elephant typically has two progeny, and by gum they look after those baby elephants to ensure they survive.
Yeah.
And the other is what you might call the codfish, that has several million progeny, only two of which are likely to survive. And there's nothing wrong with either strategy.
Yet it results in the same.
The result comes out the same, but it's a matter of taste. And are you an elephant publisher or a codfish?
We're getting a little bit of David Attenborough in here.
Well, I remember, I hope I'm not doing anyone an injustice, but St. Martin's Press, when managed, run by Tom McCormack in the 70s and 80s, maybe longer, don't know exactly, was very much, his approach was he'd come to England and would buy rights in as many books as he possibly could, paying as little money as he possibly could, and every now and again he got a winner, like James Herriot, which goes to your thesis there. When St. Martin's Press changed management, they focused more on a few really big authors. So they actually made a shift. Although I suspect there's still an element of they're not quite Farrar Straus, put it that way.
Going forward, I hate that term, but going forward, do you think there's a benefit to following one approach or the other, or it doesn't really matter?
I tell you what I think. I think the very big publishers are the market. And for them, they need the volume. Their strength is scale. They need the market, they need the continuing number of books, and they have the financial resource to take the risk across a large number of titles. I think for the smaller publishers, I suspect, again, they have no choice, but they go down the elephant strategy. And that has its compensations.
Well, they feel like they're doing justice to each title too, I suppose.
I think that, and I think that, well, at least how I see it, not everyone sees it this way, is that if you've got an elephant baby to look after, you have to look after every bit of it. You have to make sure it gets fed, it gets washed, it gets slept, it gets protected. In winter and summer and daytime and nighttime. You don't subcontract. Well, subcontract's the wrong word. You don't break up the bits. Everything, there's a gestalt, everything has to be done. Whereas, frequently books, sometimes in America, a different publisher, and another one does German, and another one does this, and the agent retains the rights to this and that, so that who is the mother or father of this baby? And so I think... And
that's the worst thing for the kid.
Well, you'd have
really,
thought.
They need to know who your parents are.
Well, exactly. And so I think that gradually over the last 45 years, more and more rights have been withheld from the publisher, which I understand from the author's point of view and the agent's point of view. But I think in the end it reduces the responsibility of the publisher, of the mother elephant.
Yeah.
The child,
The mother doesn't feel quite so invested in the child.
Exactly. So if you don't have any benefit from the German rights, you really don't give a damn what happens in Germany, where maybe you should. So.
it seems to me that literary agents they've increased in their influence and power in the industry.
Hugely.
You think that's going to continue? Do you ever see it, the mother...
Yeah, I think not. I think for when it comes to the dealing with the big publishers, I think an author needs that support.
The kind of giving it over to...
Because then the literary agent is effectively becoming the publisher. They become the mother.
Yes.
But if the smaller publishers can offer maternity care...
Okay. Yeah.
Then the agent is not as necessary.
Yeah.
I don't think.
Okay.
But, as the big guys are going to control a very substantial part of the market and possibly a growing part of the market, the agents will live off them.
Mm-hmm. Okay. How is copyright being eroded these days?
Just look around you. Well, first of all, there's clearly piracy. The facility, the ease of pirating digital books makes a mockery of, to some extent, of copyright. That's fairly obvious. Then
because it's impossible to police.
Well, you can police it, and you can do, and people and publishers associations and publishers and copyright agencies are doing their best. So we can control it. It's not like the music industry. We didn't release digital versions, unprotected digital versions into the world as the CD was. We didn't do that. So we can protect it, but you're never protected absolutely. It's not feasible. And if you think of again back to scientific publishing, ResearchGate and whatever they're called, the various people who make available everything, that's a breach of copyright in many ways. I think possibly not ResearchGate, although there's grey areas in all this. But the other area...
ResearchGate is what, professors putting their stuff up on their own?
ResearchGate's an organisation based in Germany who encourage scientists to put the stuff up on their site so that everyone can see it.
Yeah.
That is not fine if the original publisher has the copyright license. However, it's very hard and publishers don't want to sue their own authors.
Yeah, I guess the authors, the thing is
the authors are the breachers of the copyright.
Yeah.
In a way.
And they're breaching their own copyright.
Yeah.
So how can you punish
that? So this
that?
is one of the complexities that has emerged from this technological change.
And I know, a lot of the professors want they want to publish textbooks too that they don't typically make a lot of money off.
Well, textbooks is a different game because they do get paid something.
Same author, yeah.
But same author.
But the students have to pay a huge amount of money, and that's what's driving this open text.
Yeah. Although the open text movement is not nearly as dramatic as the open research movement. Open access to journal articles is growing rapidly and is huge and is transformational. The open text thing is, I would say at the moment anyway, around the fringes rather than in the centre.
Right.
I mean, it's certainly damaged sales of textbooks, but probably more damaging has been Amazon's ability to manage a used book service incredibly efficiently.
Textbooks,
textbooks.
Yeah.
So that, in a way, that technology was more. But so back to the erosion of copyright. The other area is, of course, the GAFMA, the big technology companies whose interests are in building their customer base rather than their content base. They want traffic, and they will use anything. So the Google Library project was such a thing, and now we have various legal challenges to their using other people's material and what is copyright and how much is copyright, what can you take, what can't you take. But all we do know is the chipping away and indeed the creation of a psychology which says information is free and should be free, which in itself undermines the status of copyright.
Yeah, the general attitude among people is to take umbrage at having to pay for reading the paper now.
Absolutely, although I remember a guy called Gordon Graham, who was the MD of McGraw-Hill in the UK, Canadian I think, or maybe he was Scottish with a Canadian accent, can't remember. Anyway, whatever, Gordon Graham once said that where information is free, there is little freedom of information. And there is some sense in that. If it's free, you're not quite sure. Pravda during the communist era was as fake news is today. So the undermining of copyright through this sense, as you say, of people thinking stuff should be free. And then unintended consequences damaging to copyright. So the Canadian government, I don't want to pick on them.
It's okay, we love to do that.
Yes, and what's more, we're allowed to without going to jail. I don't know the full details of the legal situation, but essentially they, under Canadian copyright law, made an exception for use in libraries and in schools of copyright material, so that the school or the library did not have to pay copyright fees for the reproduction of choral music for their school concert or whatever. Well, the joy of copyright is pretty simple. That's mine. And if you want to use it, you must ask my permission, and I will grant it or not. And I will make it free to you, or I will not make it free to you. But
it's your decision.
But it's my decision. It's not the Canadian government's decision. But they created this exception because it's for good causes. No one doubts the goodness of the cause, or indeed the goodness of the thinking that went into it. The result has been incredibly damaging to the Canadian educational publishers market, as a result of which a number of people have pulled out of publishing educational books in Canada altogether because they just won't get a return on it. And in turn, it does what the Canadian government, I'm sure, does not wish to do, which is it sucks in more US textbooks into the Canadian market. An even more complicated and difficult exception is that for visually handicapped people. Publishers have always, as far as I know, always allowed Braille editions, and indeed have facilitated digital editions for visually handicapped people. But the organisations representing visually handicapped wanted it more than custom and practice. They wanted it enshrined in a law giving an exception to copyright. Now, it's a very difficult situation because you definitely you're on their side.
On the other hand.
Yeah. On the other hand, what is a visually handicapped person? How do you define it? So how broad is this exception?
Mm-hmm.
How do you monitor it? How do you ensure that it's not being abused? How do you protect the interests of the author community whose copyrights you're representing? And we got through it. There's a thing called the Marrakesh Treaty, which is now being adopted around the world by countries. But by God, it's hard. And again, I think we call it salami slicing. What was a simple copyright, this is mine, I can decide, is being diminished.
Yeah.
So when I think about the threats to copyright, that exceptions is one. And indeed, there are the Australian government, I hope they've forgotten this idea now, but they were thinking of adopting the Canadian thing for their educational institutions. And we've pointed out to them what happened in Canada. And incidentally, I think the Canadian government is rethinking this. Please God, they come to the right conclusion. They get a second chance, unlike the Brexit referendum.
Yeah, somehow I don't see huge crowds of people protesting it in Canada, though. Like this is happening.
No, but we can have huge crowds protesting here, and it still doesn't make any difference.
Yeah. This has come out a couple of times just recently with, in Canada, the Giller Award winner.
Yeah.
And just now the Booker winner. They've used their prize money to pay off their debts. Authors are, speaking of copyright and protecting their income, it seems like it's more difficult than ever to make money as an author.
Well, the Society of Authors published some survey, or the ALCS, the Association of whatever it is, collecting agencies, published a thing saying that the average wage for an author, if it's a misnomer, but anyway, has fallen, which I could well believe, in that, well, the prices of books have fallen in real terms. In this country, at least, the public library system is shot to bits, which for the mid-list author, for the big guys are still making lots of money, and the little guys who do nothing still do nothing. But I think mainly it's hit the mid-list author, and for them, public libraries was a significant source of income. They still get some income, but I'm sure it's diminished. But also that, back to your thing about about contraception and all the rest of it, the number of books out there. So you take the totality of the marketplace, it's going to be shared around more people. So I think
it's being sliced thinner and thinner.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't see that changing. Except, I don't see it changing. I can't see how it can. So then you have to say, well, the authors who will earn more are the ones that are doing something so special that people will pay more for it, or more people will pay the same for it. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. One sympathises. I really do sympathise with, particularly with the mid-list, the professional author who, the not Premiership, but first, second division crime writer, who used to sell 10,000 copies is now selling 5,000. That's hard, and they're professionals.
Why did English language books need both an American and a British editor, while others don't?
I have absolutely no idea. I can think of various explanations of how it's come to be. There was, I think it was Uncle Tom's Cabin, was published in America, and the Galleys proofs were shipped over to England, and an English publisher published it separately. Because it took a long time for the ships to get over, and to typeset something twice so you used to have 2 editions. That clearly is not the case today. I don't think transport or logistics is the issue.
Is it just because they want to change some slang or lingo, perhaps, or colloquialisms?
Well, that's true in some very early level children's books, where aubergines and eggplant. But not for adult stuff.
No,
in fact, I think it's an abomination to start fiddling with an author's language.
But then why do they have these?
All right, well, we'll come to that. But just to say, when I was at Macmillan and we owned Nature magazine, Science magazine, the rule was that Americans wrote in American and Brits wrote in Brits and Australians wrote in Australian. If that was their spelling, that was their way, that's what it was, even in the same magazine. We didn't try to impose any degree of consistency. So I think that's a red herring. No, I think there are a number of reasons. If I start with the cynical ones, if you're a literary agent representing an author, your job is to maximise the advance payable to that author. it is probably easier to split the rights in order to get 2 overpaid advances.
The thing about advances, though, is that it's just getting the money up front.
Well, yes,
theoretically.
But in theory, but
if they don't sell, then they
that's
that's
their job. They get to keep it.
They do get to keep it.
So that's the point.
Even if they don't sell it.
Yeah. And in
Is that the case
many
in all of the contracts?
a lot. Yeah.
Okay.
So that's a cynical thing. The second cynical thing is that the literary agent charges 15% typically, not always, but typically, of the author's income. Now, if all they had to do was one contract with a publisher for world rights, why would they get 15%?
Yeah, why couldn't the author just do it directly, sign the
or
papers?
pay the guy $500 to
Yeah.
do the contract? By making it complex.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, by making it so that it looks like they're doing extra work.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which they are,
Yeah, okay.
Which they are. They're making work. I would argue it's make work.
Yeah.
So those are the 2 cynical explanations. The less cynical, although I'm not entirely convinced, is that an editor in the US will have a better understanding of the marketplace and will ensure that the book gets the best possible treatment.
Which means what?
Well, it means going to the sales conference and making a fuss about it. It means ensuring that the cover is more appropriate to the American market. I don't happen to agree with that. Also, I think it's incredibly nationalistic, because that implies there are only 2 countries in the world, one being the USA and the other being the United Kingdom. Actually, the books will sell in Australia, and maybe Australia should have an edition, if the logic would say. And what about India? Give them a separate cover and a separate editor.
Canada typically does have
and
a
Canada
separate,
does that every now and
do
then.
have a separate edition.
Yeah, sometimes.
Often with the big ones anyway.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it's an obsolete concept.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm afraid I'm in a minority. Most people support having these things. Now, the downside of having the 2 editions, apart from the additional cost, multiple covers, multiple editors, multiple this, multiple that.
But just what do the editors do?
Well, I mean, if you take Margaret Atwood, for instance, I'm sure that there's an editor in the US and probably one in Canada reading it and editing and commenting and feeding back to Peggy, and there's one here. Now, whether that improves it by having all these people looking at it, I'm not sure, but if she thinks it does, then...
Yeah, but do they all sort of have input and then she comes out with one manuscript,
Yeah.
or do they have input?
No, one manuscript,
Right,
so they have input.
So she's got a bunch of people calling her up.
Yeah.
Okay.
Although typically the US or the UK publisher will be the sort of integrator of that. But the other downside is a commercial one, which is that copyright is a legal monopoly. Monopolies are illegal by and large. Copyright, we're lucky, said, yeah, you can have a monopoly. You can have a monopoly for typically 70 years after the death of the author. There is a monopoly. For the author, it protects the author,
And
keeps
their
the prices,
offspring.
and their offspring for a generation is the idea, and possibly 2. Once you have a duopoly, duopolies are a lot less effective than monopolies. Once you have a duopoly, they are less effective. And of course, in much of the world is what's called an open market. An exclusive UK edition in the UK and Australia and bits of the Commonwealth, but excluding Canada normally. The US has Canada and the US, North America. They forget about Mexico. Don't know why. Anyway, the rest of the world is typically is open. That means you've moved from monopoly to a duopoly in these territories.
So in other words, the bookseller has the choice of buying the American or the British or Canadian even edition if they want to.
Yeah. And then they typically will pick the cheapest, which probably returns the least to the author long term.
And that part of that might be exchange rates from the different
all
countries.
sorts. Yeah. Well, I mean, Amazon certainly monitor changing exchange rates and ensure that they buy the cheapest. And of course, it then reduces the motivation of the publisher. For instance, if you don't have an exclusive right in Japan to sell the book, because there's 2 of you or 3 of you or 4 of you if there's an Australian edition, who's going to put up the money to promote it? No one.
Yeah, because why should I promote the other guy?
Exactly. So
that's the situation right now.
That's the situation right now. Not on all books, and fortunately, well, in academic publishing, it's definitely not the case. Everything is worldwide and managed properly, in my view. And quite a lot of non-fiction. But where it comes to fiction, there's very, very often separate editions.
So again, future going to head towards what you're thinking?
Yeah, I think so, because the big companies are all global. There's no reason why Penguin Random House can't handle a book everywhere in the world, and they will.
Yeah.
They'll pretend not to.
Well, this is another thing with Penguin Random House, is they've got so many colophones trying to suck the consumer into thinking that there's all sorts of different editors who...
Well, but it's true. They have all sorts of different editors. The question is, how free are they, ultimately?
Right.
So,
there's no competition. It's basically... Well, it's a marketing ploy, isn't it?
No, I don't think... Well, I'm sure some of it, but I really don't think that is the main driver. The main driver is that they've acquired, over the years, lots of these publishing imprints, distinguished publishing imprints.
Yeah.
And they've paid good money for them. They aren't going to bury them.
No, the brand is there.
So the brand is there, and it's a brand, it's more an author-facing brand than a reader-facing brand. I don't think the readers, by and large, care very much.
Yeah, they'll buy the author.
They buy the author, yeah. So it's a way of attracting authors, because the
prestige of...
Yeah, and I'm in the same thing as same companies publish George Orwell or whatever it might be.
I see.
I mean, Faber certainly have that in spades, but so do many of the Penguin Random House or Hachette or HarperCollins brands. So mainly the competition is about encouraging authors to you at the best, for the best books.
Oh, that's interesting. So it's used in a way to attract the best authors. Just like advertising, I've heard, it's basically directed at the authors. The fact that, oh, look what they're doing for so and so. Maybe they'll do that for me.
No, absolutely. And I think it's right. And the author wants to think that the editor at Heinemann or at Secker has control, and they do. More control, But that's what leads to, incidentally, back to the original question, to the multiple editions, because if Ms. Secker in New York doesn't like the book, why should she be forced to put it on her list? So then it goes somewhere else. Then you end up with 2 editions. Sometimes. Mind you, you'd think at Penguin Random House they could find someone to like a book.
Yes. Let's see. Why do publishers make available their least affordable format, hardback, at the time of maximum publicity exposure for a book, and then issue the affordable paperback when there's greatly less exposure?
Now,
that's
the question. And I would add a corollary to that question, if you can have a corollary to a question, I'm not sure, is that why is it that Australians, Irish people, and people occupying the bits of airport beyond customs get paperbacks, when people living in England, Scotland, Northern Ireland have to make do with hardbacks? I can only think it's sheer madness. And I suppose really what's happened is that the paperback has diminished in importance, particularly with e-book availability. So the e-book has really eaten into the paperback market, leaving the hardback as being the main source of revenue. So, but it seems to me either you think books are worth £20, $30, or they're not. And if they're worth £20, $30, publish them at £20, $30 with the thing. Don't worry about the paperback so much. And I think maybe that's what's happened. But I would also say if it is right to publish a trade paperback at $20 rather than $30 around publication, then so be it, if you can make it work.
Do they, funny, I'm trying to remember it was weird. It was I don't know if it was the first, but it was a Methuen book by a guy called Lind, Concrete something. Anyway, I think that was an experiment they did where they put the paperback and the hardback out at the same time.
Uh-huh.
Why don't they do that now?
Academic publishing does frequently.
Right.
Well, because the assumption is that you'd never sell any hardbacks.
One will cannibalize.
Yeah. Although, with Harry Potter, for instance, we've had hardbacks and paperbacks in the market. We've had adult versions and children's versions. We've had them boxed every which way and works. And that's an exceptional thing. But it's a perfectly good question as to why you wouldn't. To give a very parochial example, though, there's a book I've been involved in for 25 years called Wisden Cricketer's Almanac. It's a big fat thing.
I know, I got the last picture I took of you. You had a bunch of them.
Yeah, I've got even more now. And it's £60 in hardback. There's a paperback edition, comes out simultaneously.
Yeah.
Priced at £60. Some people want the paperback and some people want the hardback.
With the second-hand book business, the trade paperbacks sell much better than hardbacks do.
Yeah.
So they'll give you more in a trade-in for a trade paperback.
Yeah. So, these are things that will change. And in different markets, you see. In France, for instance, nearly everything comes out in paperback, in a trade paperback format, at typically €22. That's quite a lot of money for a paperback, but that's the established price, and good on them. And there's occasionally they do hardbacks, but I think the bulk come out initially, and you don't need a hardback, depending on the type of book. Mm-hmm. Collectibles, gifts, maybe.
Is that a very small part of the market? Collectors, are there more collectors now than before, or the same? Or
no idea, Nigel. It's one of those. Do you know? I think it's fair to say that we have no idea about almost everything.
Well, that's the thing about publishing, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
It's what makes it interesting. What's happening now with you and Bloomsbury?
All right. Okay, after 11 years of very happy years at Bloomsbury, doing all sorts of stuff and being on the board, and it's a public company listed on the main London Stock Exchange, where there are very strict and proper governance rules and the rest of it. I'm now 69.
Don't look it.
Thank you. And I came down from 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, to 2 or 3 days a week, and then wanted to do more things. So I stepped down from the board in June and stepped down from line management. However, I'm no longer on the Bloomsbury payroll. I'm no longer on their board. They announced their results yesterday, and so joy of joys, I'm not doing the trip around the City of London talking to the shareholders and all that. However,
up or down?
What?
They up or down?
The shares?
Yeah.
I don't know,
It's
because
easier to do it when they're up.
the shares. I had a terrible admission here. We announced my change thing in the last set of results in June, which were terrific results. So we popped in about me leaving, and the share price zoomed up, which is, I'm pleased to say, for my shareholding, but not so pleased that they all so enthusiastic. Yeah. Anyway, the share price has moderated a bit now. Anyway, so, however, they asked me to stay on doing a few things. So I'm working on strategy for China and for cricket. Those are the two main things, but a few other things as well on the side. And I'm always available to them for whatever use I may pay. And I try to be helpful, which I am. So that was my Bloomsbury relationship. So they give me a little office upstairs, which I share with someone, which is very nice. And I still go to parties and things, and still see people, and people still ask my advice on various things, and that's completely fine. And that will carry on for as long as it carries on. Meanwhile, and the China thing is very important. So. For obvious reasons.
Just a bit about China. What on earth are you going to do with China?
Well, I think the big opportunity that I can talk about, there are many opportunities in China. China is a huge, difficult, mesmerizing.
It's weird. It's weird.
It's weird, but Trumpian America is not straightforward. Might.
That's true. I was over there about 6 months ago, and just looking at all these rows and rows of skyscrapers that are empty, that were just put up, and I guess people moved in and then they moved out, and they're just sitting there like cities empty. Yeah.
Well, there are some empty and some overflowing as well. So
true. Yeah. But that's a managed economy for you, I guess. But.
Well, yes. I mean, the pluses and minuses of a managed economy. Mm-hmm. You should look up the case study of the port authorities of Singapore and Hong Kong when they both put in computer systems. It's a Harvard Business School case study. The Singapore one was a controlled economy. Hong Kong was free enterprise. And they went about it in the typical ways that each of them would do. It was to build a system so you could turn the ships around more rapidly when they came in and left. And it transpired that they both cost the same and they were both as effective. It's a little like the elephants and the codfish, Yeah. It's not necessarily. No, the big opportunity for Bloomsbury and for China is that there are many, many, many great Chinese books being written and indeed translated into English.
Don't see too many of them,
You don't see too many of them because there is no marketing organisation, global marketing organisation into the rest of the world. So we're putting together, with Chinese publishers, a marketing organisation to take Chinese books in English to the rest of the world. That's the one thing I can talk about because we've announced it in various places. And with the support of the Chinese government and etc. Also,
what does that mean? You're not going to get too many dissidents writing any interesting literature.
Well, I think the dissidents wouldn't write interesting literature from within China anyway,
they're
would
not
they?
allowed to.
No, exactly. So you're not. But that's
so you're getting government approved.
Well, it depends what you mean. I mean, everything in China is government approved, of course.
Yeah. But it can be good and government approved at the same time, I guess.
Well, exactly. I mean, if you want a book on train technology.
Yeah.
Now, are you going to get a book about the benefits of capitalistic? Right? You're not. And
no.
Are you going to get a novel where President Xi appears? Probably not.
Incidentally, in every bookstore I visited in China, at the front,
they have that.
His book
It's surprise, surprise.
All over the place.
Yeah, surprise, surprise. On the other hand, if you go to various states in the Middle East, you will find the same thing.
Yeah.
It actually shows the power of the book that the leaders of these places want to be there. So that's China. Then on top of that, and this has lived down to a sort of day a week for Bloomsbury, has liberated me to do a few other things, some of which I've always done, some of which are new. But in particular, I've announced the startup of a new publishing company called Mensch Publishing, as in Menschlichkeit, or whatever, where everyone in America understands the context. Not everyone in this country, and in Germany they don't get it at all. It doesn't matter. And I've got one book, which I'm publishing on February the 7th of this coming year. And I'm not taking anything else on until I've proved that I can do it.
So you're a mother elephant then, right?
I'm a mother elephant, absolutely. Boy, am I a mother elephant. And I'm discovering what I don't know, which is fantastic. Well, the things
so you
never
know
had
everything about publishing.
Well, you thought, I'd have thought after 45 years I should, but, how do I get an SBN, a standard book number? How do you generate a barcode? I don't know. All this stuff.
Do that.
Yeah, of course, yeah. So I'm finding all these things.
Those are two things that I need to talk to specific experts about for the bibliophile.
Yeah.
If I want to know everything about the book.
Yeah, no, they're both important, really important things.
Yeah.
So stuff like that, and how many rounds of proofs do you have, and do you do it? Anyway, I'm learning a hell of a lot, which is great. I'm discovering the issues. So I'm using Bloomsbury as my sales and distribution partner, because I can't do that from home.
But it'll have your new
it's Mensch Publishing. Yeah. It'll be it's my risk, probably £20,000 at risk.
Can you talk about the book at all or not?
Yes, I can. It's called Time to Go.
Okay.
And the time to go is when, you're at a party, it's time to go. And there's also a thing in life when it's time to go.
It's called death, right?
It's called death.
And time to leave Bloomsbury.
Yes, possibly, yeah. That wasn't death.
No.
But time to go.
Life.
Yeah, new life. So time to go. There's an elderly couple, English couple, living in France, near where I live in France, which is how I came about. They're getting on for 90, perfectly good health. Well, they're 90, but okay, but they really don't want to go gaga.
That's the biggest fear of pretty well everyone.
Exactly.
Who reads, certainly.
And everyone has parents or themselves or whatever. It's a big issue. And so they invite their son, Guy, who's a novelist, Guy Kennaway, published by Canongate and Cape, a sort of humorous novelist, but literary, for a meeting. And they say, "Oh, Guy, darling, Stanley and I are going to," I think the mum more than Stanley,
Okay.
"We've decided we both want to die, and but we'll need your help." He, being a novelist, starts making notes. And for a year they come up with various plans on how they're going to do it. It's a very funny book, because he's a funny writer. But it's a very serious book. It's an important book.
Get a lot of jokes out of death, though, don't you?
Well, you can. And Stanley eventually dies just natural causes. Susie, the mum, decides she now doesn't want to die because she's a fighter. And she's got something to fight for, which is to change the law on assisted suicide. And so I have no doubt she will come over for the launch. And she will lay about her.
Excellent.
And so that's the book. It's funny. It's called Time to Go. It's Guy Kennaway. We've got a cover that he's reading the proofs as we speak. I will pass for press, I hope, within a couple of weeks. We'll have printed copies by February. We will dispatch them to the United States and Canada and all parts of the world through the Bloomsbury distribution channel. Jay Jopling, who's the owner of the White Cube Gallery, a very important art gallery in the centre of Mayfair, is backing the party because he's a friend. A guy called Nick Quinn, who's a French-based documentary maker, is filming us as we move towards publication, and we'll film The Mum. We've got an extremely good actor, Alex Jennings, to read the audio book. He played the Duke of Windsor in the Netflix series, and was in the Jeremy Thorpe documentary that happened recently. Very good, and so there'll be the audio book will come out simultaneously. I am going to France on tomorrow, and while there I will record Susie's, the mum's voice, to give to a female actor because she wrote one chapter in the book. Okay. He invited her to write a chapter which he wouldn't touch, to let her have her voice. So we've got to find...
What was that? What wouldn't he touch?
Anything she wrote. I mean, he would allow everything to. So she's writing a chapter about how she sees it all.
I see, okay. Yeah. I thought you were going to tell me it was about sex or something.
No,
he didn't want to touch that. So.
No. Okay. It's whatever it was.
Yes,
she's got her voice out there. But it means on the audio book we have to have someone whose voice was at least not too dissimilar. Anyway, all these things I'm learning. And on the 7th of February we publish, and I'll either lose 20,000 or I'll make a bit. And the author...
A bit? You may make a whole whack.
Well, it may work, yeah. But but publishing, that sort of publishing is not... unless you get, really big.
Yeah.
I don't think you'll ever make... The margins are okay, but they're not stellar. They're just what they are. But what I really hope is I'm paying the author. I shouldn't give the exact number because it wouldn't be right. But I'm paying him a percentage of everything that I get revenue, and I hope that's a good number. And I hope it's more than he gets for his novels as advances, which don't earn out. Right. I hope he will actually earn this money, and he's right behind it all. And Mensch. As I say, menschlich is as menschlich does. So I'm doing things that probably I shouldn't, like whenever I get a bill, I pay it by return, because that's what menschlich is. Mm-hmm. And if he wants to make a change, the author wants to make a change, he gets a change. And if he doesn't like the cover, it's his cover. And so he has those rights throughout, and I don't think I've done anything without consulting him, because it's his book.
And that's how you think publishing should work?
Well, it's a way. It may not work.
Okay.
Who knows? Did you see the piece I wrote in Publishing Perspectives about it?
When did that come?
During the Frankfurt Book Fair, about 2 weeks ago.
I think I don't think.
Okay, if you go to Publishing Perspectives, I've written a piece which is called "How (open brackets) not close brackets to start a publishing business" or something like that.
It's just a bit odd that you haven't experienced this before.
I've never owned my own business.
No, that's right. I mean, you're putting your own money up, but just doing these things or you knew about the fact that they had to be done, but you're actually doing it yourself. I suppose that's the difference.
That's the difference. I mean, when I was started 45 years ago, I did many of these things myself, but everything's changed quite a lot in that time, and I've been general managing for quite a few years now, and frankly more concerned with the structure of the organisations and how the marketing will work and developing new lines, but not the nitty-gritty.
Do you think 20 years ago you could have even done this? Probably not. Like, is it?
I think it's a lot. I think in a way it's easier today. Yeah.
Yeah. And do you think that anyone who's smart and has got £20,000 could do something like this?
Absolutely. And I back to, I think before where we started. I think the innovation in the industry is going to come from those people rather than the big guys. The big guys will innovate in certain ways.
Yeah.
But in terms of pure publishing. I do this monthly column for Publishing Perspectives, and so I wrote about setting up Mensch.
Yeah.
But this month's column, providing the editor doesn't reject it, which he is entitled to do, is about accounting in publishing, which sounds very boring, and it may well be a boring piece.
Well, especially if it's on your own money, it's not boring, is it?
Well, that's true, but it's also how to measure commercial success. So I identify 5 measures. The first measure is how many copies do you sell? And that, for many authors, is the definition of commercial success. And indeed, we plaster it, 1 million copies sold on the front cover. Trouble with that is, in today's world, you could do tens of thousands of copies of a 1 cent ebook.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't mean anything. So, copies not so good. The second one is revenues. Well, that's good. And you really want revenues to go up. So that's a reasonable one. But the trouble with revenues is, if the revenues are all made at negative margin, anyone can sell a book if you discount it far enough, and you get revenue for it, but you've given the discount is such that it's more than the print cost.
You want some profit is what you want.
So, well, the third one is profit. The trouble with profit, and profit is better than, I'm going up the tree here. Profit is better.
You're going up to self-actualization, right?
Well, profit is better, but profit is subjective. One may think it's not subjective, but it is, because you're entitled to have whatever accounting policies you may decide to deal with, on how you deal with advance provisions, stock provisions, with bad debt provisions, how you amortize your computer costs. Of course, the main beneficiary of profit is Her Majesty's revenue, because tax is paid on profit, not on revenue, but on profit.
Mm-hmm.
So whilst we all love more profit, of course, whatever percentage your government takes of it, they take of it. So be careful. And so you move to the fourth one, because if you are running your own business, profit, well, you don't really want to spend money with the government if you don't have to. But what really matters is cash flow. And cash is a tangible thing. It's not subjective. Mm-hmm. There it is or there it isn't. There's no write-offs, it's there or it's gone. Everything you've spent is spent, and everything you earn is earned, and you're left with cash. And I'm pretty sure in Stone Age, that's how the first menhir manufacturers operated. They didn't have accounting principles, except a really good one. It's money in, money out.
I think that's the first actual example of writing is accounting.
Yeah, who is it?
I think the Phoenician. I don't know exactly.
But were they doing it on cash or profit? I wonder. So cash is the fourth criterion.
Mm.
But the trouble with cash is, if you're a publisher, generating cash is all very well, but that's not what you're being measured on. Because you're a publisher, you're meant to, how well are you publishing is the question.
Are you publishing something good?
So you move to the fifth, which is asset value. And asset value is what is sitting in your filing cabinets or on your hard disk, called author's contracts. So for instance, the license for the term of copyright to publish the 7 volumes of Harry Potter by gum is an asset, as is Margaret Atwood or Michael and Darcy, or anyone else you care to name. And have you, in the course of this year that's just been passed, added to that asset value, or have you not? And it's very hard to measure assets. You can measure revenue and you can measure profit and you can measure cash, but you can't actually measure intellectual property assets. Or indeed, it's not just intellectual property, it's the brand values, your the end of the year, Faber is more famous than it was at the beginning of the year, more attractive than it was at the beginning of the year.
Just won the Booker.
Yeah, that's very hard to measure. That it is hard to measure does not mean you should not try to measure it, and does not mean you shouldn't try to take account of it. Now, if you're a public company, your asset value is reflected in your share price, but we know markets are imperfect, and one would hope that the publisher knows more about their assets than the City of London or Wall Street. And anyway, most publishers are not public companies.
Is this all for the benefit of the little guy like you?
Well, no, I don't think it's to the benefit of anyone. I think it is a question of
But does it
understanding what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
So the case study I use is Penguin's acquisition of Frederick Warne in 1973, I think.
That's the children's book.
Yeah. Well, it was at one stage it was a general publisher. Now, I haven't got the numbers, but I'm pretty sure it had static sales, both in volume and value. I suspect it was making very little profit, generating almost no cash. Peter Mayer, God bless him, saw something in there, not about its profits or its revenue, but about its assets, which was Peter Rabbit, the license to publish Peter Rabbit.
And to make films from it.
And you name it. And one of the great acquisitions of the 20th century. And I don't think he would have, well, I think he might have done. He would intuitively was measuring the asset value. And that's what we have to do. And when I was at Oxford, they have some great products, obviously. And as an editor...
Yeah, Oxford University Press.
Yeah. And as an editor there, I used to think that if in 10 years you as an editor could add one product to their top 10.
You mean like one title?
One title or one something. It might be set up a new branch in Ghana. In my case, it was commissioning and publishing something called the Oxford Textbook of Medicine, which for, not now I don't think, but then for 10, 20 years, added to their asset value. You may not have seen the profit in year one or year two, but over time it absolutely did add to their asset value. So I think it's just a way of, everything else is important. All 5 criteria of measurement are important. But the hardest one, and therefore in a way the most interesting one, is the evaluation of asset value and how do you increase it. I mean, to give you a negative example, it's quite easy to make money by buying books from packagers. You do a deal with a packager for a new illustrated biography of Muhammad Ali. You sell 10,000 copies, you make a profit, and you run away. But you haven't added to the asset value of the business you're running.
Getting back to you, what you've been doing on your own here with Mensch.
Yeah.
You know, something that you're really proud of achieving is an asset.
I hope.
It will be an asset.
Well, I certainly hope so. If it's not, I'll give it to my son.
Okay.
So.
If not, you'll ask your son to help you kill yourself.
Yeah, that's the way it is. Yeah, but not for a few years yet. I'm still hoping to live on. I'm waiting for my great-grandchildren. That's my thing.
That's a pretty good incentive.
Certainly is. We've got a way to go.
Yeah. Any final thoughts about your experience in publishing, either on your own or as a manager, and where it's all headed?
Well, I have thought about it a bit, because 46 years, it's a long time, as they say. And one conclusion is that it's a very decent industry.
I hear that all over the place. Well, I've experienced it too.
Yeah, but I sit on the advisory committee of the Frankfurt Book Fair, and round the table are what in Yiddish we call big macher, the big players,
Mucky mucks
of the industry, and they are as nice, as inclusive, as open as the really nice smaller ones, the smaller independents who are also nice and in different things. Like I find people who work in production are terrific, and people who work in marketing terrific, in accounting, and in Italy and in Spain and in Latin America and in China.
Why is that?
I think because we're working with something that genuinely does no evil.
Hachette sells arms, doesn't it, somewhere?
Well, no. Lagardère owns a chunk of an arms thing, but that's not their publishing. And Google claims to do no evil. Well, okay, and I suspect some books are a bit evil. But by and large, we are working in a product that we love.
That's doing good in the world.
By and large doing good, even if it's a failure financially, for someone it will have done some good. Right? Maybe the author's mother is the only one, but that may be enough.
Yeah.
That may be enough.
Yeah.
So I think that leads to nicer people. I think also that by and large it's not a hugely profitable business. Back to my point about the accounting. You would think more publishers would go broke than do. And the reason they don't is because they get bought.
That's how they make their money, is they don't make it while they're doing the work.
And that's because they've built the asset.
Mm-hmm.
Back to why that asset valuation is so important. But it does mean that we're open with each other because there's a lot of this trading going on. And it's fun. It's hard to say it's not fun. I mean, compared... My father was a first-generation immigrant, and so he ran shoe shops, and they had a tassel factory and various other things. But he would die. He did die, but he would have died to do the job I've done over my career, because the combination of commerce, culture, and creativity is very attractive. And perhaps why, back to my original thing about the article is going to be called Four Jews and a Catholic for the author. I don't know whether they use that headline, but that was mine. But the reason that there were four Jews, basically immigrants, is because it's relatively low working capital, and it plays to the strengths of an educated person who likes adding up.
Yes. Who pays attention to that and is hard-working.
Yeah, and a lot of detail. And so it played to that genre. The four were Andre Deutsch, George Weidenfeld, Paul Hamlin, and Charles Pick, who was the MD of Heinemann. And the fifth was Lord Longford, who owned Sidgwick and Jackson. He was a Catholic.
Well, let's. The next time we meet, I'll look forward to you having developed assets in Mensch, and you would have just sold out to a conglomerate, and we could talk about that.
Yeah.
How's that?
Hey, fantastic! I hope I got a good price.
I've been speaking with Richard Charkin, who has been in the publishing business since 1972.
Correct.
Thanks again.
Thanks very much, Nigel.